Hi everyone, I'm Hales and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to show you that I have made a coat. I've never made a coat before, so I'm quite pleased that I've managed to make one, and I thought I'd just do a bit of a review of the pattern and show you some of the construction that I did as I went along. The pattern I used was Butterick 6385, which I'll put the picture in here on screen rather than me holding it up wibbly wobbly to the camera. It's a princess seam lined coat and I chose version C, which has the funnel collar. The other options you could have are the sort of like the Peter Pan collar, but I thought I would go, it was a bit too girly for me, so I thought I would do that one, keep me nice and snug in the cold weather. Now, I wasn't really sure about what I was going to do with the coat and if I was going to make it or not. I was dithering, and then I saw and I thought, okay, I'll make this coat. And then somebody popped up on Instagram whose blog I also follow, which is Sewmanju, and I will link her Instagram in the description box down below. And she was deciding between about 3 coats which she was going to make, and then decided on the same coat that I was going to make. And she's like a really quick sewer, so I knew that she would make it up quicker than me, which she did. And then she also took pictures of her construction, so I used that and her knowledge basically for how I was then going to make my coat, because there's a few things that I did which are tailoring techniques and it's different from what the patterns actually suggest. So the pattern suggests using an iron-on interfacing. Every time I go to film, the cat comes to the door and starts whinging. Hang on a sec. So I also have a book called Couture something. It's in the car because I was reading it on school pickup. So I will put the picture of the book I'm referring to here. One of the things that it says in the book about the interfacing is that if you're doing a coat or a jacket and you use iron-on interfacing, it can be quite stiff. So in places where you perhaps want it to have movement and be flexible, it's better to do a sew-in interfacing. So I used horsehair canvas, which is this here, and I cut on the straight of grain for the front panels of the coat and for the yoke, but for the collar, I think it was for the collar, I cut on the bias so it can then go round so it would hold that sort of shape. Now I did put interfacing, as I go along I will put random photos in of the construction which I originally posted to my Instagram stories. And as a side note, if you go onto my Instagram profile and go onto the highlights, all of my construction techniques are in there. There's absolutely loads of them because it's taken me ages to do this coat, but if you want to see the full detail then feel free to go over there, and again I will put the link from my Instagram in the description box below. But so I had this, and it also said to do it on the top of the sleeve and then to leave it hanging to put some interfacing, and that was supposed to be cut on the bias, but I forgot, and so I only ordered 2 meters I think of this, and I cut out the shape for the sleeve, and then I realized that it was supposed to be cut on the bias and it was too late. I didn't have enough left over to recut it, so I left it as it is and I just cut it straight, and then and it seems to be fine, and it holds the shape, but you have to hand stitch it. So there's a lot of hand stitching gone on in this coat. I don't really like hand stitching it, hand sewing, but I kind of quite like this process. So I catch stitched it. I got quite a good Gutterman thread that I use, which is invisible. You can't see because it really blends in well with the coat. Now the fabric I used, I bought from Textile Express, but I did win a £25 voucher through an Instagram random giveaway, I think it was. So I put that towards buying the fabric. Now I've got my paperwork here because I couldn't remember the exact composition of it, and it's a wool serge style felt in grey. So I don't know if they still have that. If they do, then I will link it down below. And it was, I'm looking at my paperwork here, it was £16 a metre and I bought 3 meters. So my £25 I put towards that, and then obviously paid the rest myself, so that did help me to save a little bit of money. I will refer to a notebook now, which I quickly made some notes last night of the adjustments and bits and pieces that I did. So I did a full bicep adjustment because I do carry weight at the top of my arms, which I've said before, and when I made the toile of the size I think I did a 16 for the top and then graded out to an 18. But when I tried the sleeve, I couldn't pull it up because I didn't want to grade too high up on the top half and then it just be too big and bulky. But I do find that I needed to make more room in the arm area. So when I made the toile, I made the sleeve and then the body, and then I just tried it. I hadn't actually stitched them together and it just wouldn't go all the way up. So I knew that I had to add some room in there somewhere. So when I looked on YouTube for bicep adjustments, because that is my go-to, that's just easy to like try and Google the solution. Looked at a few different things. I think I did look at some articles as well on Google and decided that was the best way to do it. So I added some width in here, but it wasn't too much. So when I read it just said you should be able to ease it into the actual arm size. So that's what I did, but I did come across a few problems in terms of like gathering, when you go to gather the sleeve head, when it's a wool, and some of the canvas had caught in the seam because I hadn't catch stitched it. I'd just sewn it in, then realised I shouldn't have done that because it made it really tricky. When I was pulling my threads, the thread snapped, so I found it quite tricky to gather it. And then there was a bit too much fabric going into that space, so there is a bit of gathering where there shouldn't be. It should be just eased in rather than gathered. It's not perfect, but I did originally have gathers at the back of the garment, which I wasn't happy with, so I unpicked the whole sleeve and then redid it, and then obviously the gathers then moved to the front. And I think it's just because I should have made a different adjustment and allowed for that extra fabric to go in and made the hole it was going into bigger, which would have eased it in slightly better. But anyway, you live and learn. That's the whole thing about this. It's a learning process. I'm not a professional. I'm learning as I go along and just improve my techniques as I go along, so I will know for next time. I shortened the collar. I shortened the collar by ½ an inch. I think I shortened the sleeve length by ½ an inch, and I probably shouldn't have done because I think the sleeves are a little bit too short, but it does mean that I can layer. So when the sleeve maybe finishes there, and so if I'm wearing a shirt it does poke out, but actually I quite like that look. So it's not for everybody. I'm short-waisted and I'm 5'3", so I thought, oh, usually I shorten the bodice length, but I didn't on this one, but I did shorten the sleeve a bit and probably shouldn't have done. I catch stitched the horsehair canvas, is what I've already told you. I used silk for the lining. Now, I went to the Festival of Fabric last year, which I did a vlog and a haul for August, September time. And there was somebody there, a stallholder, and they were selling silk panels. And I think these were perhaps to make silk ties. So there was a panel of silk with a line, and then another panel, and then another line. And so they were selling by the panel, and they're only £3, but it was bigger than a metre, so it looked like quite good. So, and they buy police auction things. So I guess if somebody has tried to import a load of silk and they haven't paid the import taxes and things, it's been seized by the police, they haven't paid the taxes perhaps, and so the police then own that, and then eventually obviously the police don't want to have all this stuff, so they auction it off. So the people I bought off had bought a police auction, and that's why the silk was being sold on so cheap. So when I looked at lining my coat, I do actually have like dress lining, but it's that polyester satiny, I just thought I'm gonna sweat. It's not great. It's that sort of cheap satin, cheap lining that you get from, you know, fabric shops. But I thought, actually, why don't I use the silk? And the trouble is I didn't have enough to do the whole coat in the same fabric, but I had these silk panels in 2 different shades, but they had the same pattern. So you'll see when I will put some footage in now of what the lining actually looks like on the inside, that it's not all the same colour, and at the bottom of the coat you can then see that silk panel, that line where the panel would stop and the next panel begins. So it has that line, but it's right at the bottom. I don't think anyone's really going to notice. And the lining hangs separate from the actual coat, and it does say to do a French tack. I had to Google what a French tack was because it didn't tell me in the instructions, and I've just realised I've forgotten to do it, and I probably don't need to really do it, but it's a fancy sort of chain of stitching at either end of the lining, which then attaches to the actual body of the coat. But it seems to be fine the way it is. So it hangs separately, and I wasn't sure whether to attach it, but decided not to. So that is hand stitched, so I could do an invisible stitch. The hem of the coat is hand stitched as well, so that was done with like a blind hem. That was done by hand. The lining I have perhaps done a bit too short, because you can see the hem of the wool coat, but I did think that perhaps the lining would drop over time, and then I do want it hanging below the coat. So if it doesn't do that, I may need to unpick and then lower the hem of the lining, but overall it's fine. And I sewed the lining on the sleeve as per the instructions, and then I realised that because I'd added in sleeve heads, I will insert a photo here as well, on the coat, I'd also sewed that on the wrong side of the seam, so I had to unpick that because I'd sewn it on the top of the shoulder, where actually it should go like underneath that seam, so it would fit, so it would sit like under, not over, because when I I turned it the right way around, all you could see was the bulk of the sleeve head, and I couldn't work out how to cover it up. So I had to unpick that, re-sew that, and then realise the best way to cover everything up was to actually unpick the sleeve lining and sew it to the body. So the whole thing was then a coat lining with the sleeves and the body all together. I hope this makes sense and it's not too long-winded. Then put it in the coat, slip stitched the lining to the sleeve, did it too long and it was poking out, unpicked that, re-sewed it back up high with a deeper fold, and put like tacking stitches in the shoulders and the underarms so that it would stick to the coat and wouldn't be completely separate and shift around. So that is the lining. One big thing is I didn't do top stitching. This pattern calls for top stitching all the way down, but when I started, so you start off with the front panel, which includes the flap, the pocket flap. It was too thick to go through my machine, so I did the whole coat on my vintage Singer 201K, but I couldn't, the foot doesn't, you can't lift it extra high like I can on, say, my digital machine, and it sewed really well, and so I didn't want to switch to my digital machine for the top stitching because that's not always that great, and it doesn't sew as nicely as what this one does. So this sewed through the wool really well, but there was in places it was just too bulky, and someone did suggest that like with jeans making you get a hammer and hammer the seam flap, but I thought it would just squish the pocket flap and I didn't want to spoil the look, so I just left off the top stitching completely. So there are places where the seams obviously would then sit flatter, so I have put a few invisible stitches to hold it in place, but it doesn't have the top stitching on, and that's purely down to machine. There was a lot of unpicking and re-sewing on this garment throughout, mainly probably for mistakes I'd made, but learning as I went along. But also I was gonna find it. I hand sewed all my buttonholes, so I'll put a photo in here. I did a practice one. I found a YouTube video of, I think it's like a Japanese sewing school or something like that, where the guy shows you like a tailoring technique for hand sewing a buttonhole, and so I copied his technique because again I couldn't do it on my machine. I don't have a buttonhole foot for this vintage machine, and I use quite big buttons, so I don't think I would have been able to use it, because I do have the white buttonhole foot for my zigzag, which for my digital machine, and it's not great. It has got stuck before just going through regular fabric, so I thought it wouldn't be any good, and then it's really hard to unpick if it's gone really small stitches and messed up. So I chalk marked them up, measured them, double checked them, and then did them all by hand, and I'm really pleased with the way they turned out. And I think that if I don't have lots to do, because I only have 5 buttons plus a popper, it definitely would be something that I would do again, and I would recommend, because it's actually a lot less scary than doing it on a machine and then just making a hole in it. So yeah, that's really good. The buttons I used, they were vintage buttons, bought from Festival Fabric. I had a whole card of them. I went to the fabric shop and bought different buttons, but they were a lot smaller, and with the proportions of the coat, it just looked better with a big button. And I thought, you know what, it's not a grey button, so it might look a bit strange, but I thought actually I'll make more of a feature of it. So that is why I went with those buttons, because I had them, and because I thought that would be a nice little feature to have as well. One thing to bear in mind is that the yoke of the coat, of the lining, uses the outside fabric. So if you were to wear this coat with, I don't know, if you're going out, and you're wearing a nice dress which perhaps had a low back or something like that, you might find it a little bit itchy, because then you're basically, the yoke on the inside is wool fabric. Well, if you're using wool fabric, so that could be quite itchy. Obviously for me, if I'm wearing it out and about winter time over a shirt or a jumper or something like that, it's not going to make a difference. But if it's on bare skin, it could be quite itchy because it doesn't have the lining. It is the actual another layer of the wool, and then it goes into lining fabric. So that is something to bear in mind. One tool that I used, which was a lifesaver, was my clapper. Now my dad made me this. He has a little workshop in his garden where and it's his hobby to do woodwork. So he actually made me 2 of these. So I do have another one. But this was so good because I've read some articles which say that you should steam your wool, and others have said no, it's fine. So what I did was I steamed as I went along. So basically when I was doing the seams, put lots of steam on and then just put the clapper down, and that really helped to press the seams and it just flattened it out. But I did find at the front, even though I did understitching as the pattern suggests, it did roll out a bit, and even after sewing the buttons and the buttonholes, I found that after I'd finished like the final button at the bottom, it was like rounding out. So I got my needle and thread out again and did a few random invisible stitches just to hold that facing back, and it seems to work. So it's all sitting nice and crisp and nice and flat. It's not a perfect coat, but actually it fits me. I went outside and it's really windy at the moment. I went outside in the cold yesterday to the food shop. How glamorous is that? And it just kept me really warm, and it just kept the wind out. And I thought, you know what, it does its job. I mean, it is literally going towards the end of February at the minute. So we're heading towards spring. It's not like we're heading into winter, but the idea of making a coat is that it will last more than one season, or more than 1 year. I'm hoping it'll be a classic piece. It was on my Make 9 last year to make a coat, and it never happened. And I did say that I wanted to have a coat which would be like a piece that I could use for a few years. So I'm hoping that that's what this will be. So when autumn arrives, that's gonna be there. I'm already gonna have it made up and it's good to go. And some people suggest maybe sewing for the season ahead. So like sewing summer clothes now or spring clothes now, so then when the weather arrives and it's hot or what have you, you've got your items already there to start to go at the start of the season. So I think that is good idea, and I am now looking at spring sewing. So I will link some videos at the end of this which I'm hoping you'll be interested in, and I will see you over there, and I will also see you again soon for another video on this channel. Thank you for watching.